Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This is Joe with the Local Search Association, and I'd like to welcome you all to LSA's webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Local Business Listing Data Flow and Fixing Incorrect Listings, and will be brought to you by our guest presenter, Chris Travers from Universal Business Listing. With that, let's get started. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody, from New York City, where I'm at. I think we can push ahead. We're a couple of minutes after the hour by the look of it. So, firstly, I want to address the background on what are local listings and local search results, because often people are a little unsure about what these include. So I'm going to move through the background fairly quickly for you, though. But of course, first are organic search results. These are listings that are extracted from by web search engine bots. And typically with a query, if you look at the top of the page, that has a inferred or specified location modifier, i.e. a tailor in New York. The key point on this page is that many of the so-called organic search results will be from other directories. And if you see the second listing on this page is actually coming from yellowpages.com, and it's not unusual to see organic search results include numerous listings from third-party publishers. The next type of local search results are sponsored business listings, and these are similar to paid ads, but they are business listings formatted, so with addresses and phone information, etc. And they show up with results with specified criteria, the same as any pay-per-click search campaign does. And these are generally labeled sponsored listings. The next type are the organic business listings. And these are from structured, structured databases, meaning that these come from listings that are organized and managed by the publishers themselves. It includes the minimum of the business's name, the address, and phone number. And publishers manage these databases from one or many sources. And the growing prominence of these is what is driving the interest, the traffic, and consumer results, particularly on mobile devices when users are looking for goods or services when they're actively ready to buy. And these structured listings are really the core of the discussion for us today. So, as we know, consumers are searching on their desktop, on mobile, on GPS, navigation devices in their cars, and still using 411. But this is also growing as users are using tablets increasingly, and even Google Glasses. So the devices themselves are also becoming more numerous. And of course, where are they looking? They're looking on search engines, looking on applications on their tablets. They're looking at Internet Yellow Pages and directories. There are many mapping services where they're looking. And now social media is becoming an increasing driver from business data for these kind of local search results. And I'm putting up here a recent chart from Thrive Analytics where it's indicating the information sources used when looking for a business or service. And you can see how broad the number of places where consumers are looking is. And one of the interesting things on this is the second line, which is that print yellow pages still hold 24%. And that may be declining, but it's still an important factor when we look at the data sources. And we'll talk about that a little later on. And of course, growing on this is the social media services. And here, local use on mobile is already 50% of search. And by volume, it will soon exceed that of desktop. So again, mobile is driving the use of these local listings and why they're such an important factor when the customer is ready to take action. So the first thing I wanted to do in terms of looking at the data flow is actually to review the data sources. And of course, it starts with the business itself. Now, many small businesses may not have spent the time to create a profile to describe their business, so they are starting from scratch. And many large businesses struggle with an accurate internal data set of their locations, either because they've got thousands of locations or because of regional inconsistencies. And at UBL, we're regularly asked to start the process by providing a data set from an external source or a scraped source of the business's actual list of locations. And currently we're in a project to actually phone call the locations listed online to see if they're really part of a particular company. Now, the website itself is a vital source of local branch data and needs to be accurate and consistent with everything else that is done online. And businesses will, of course, submit versions of their own profiles or databases to sites themselves, particularly Google and Bing, which have an excellent interface for single or bulk management. So we're quite aware that that is a common practice directly by the business. And many businesses will do that directly with a couple of major sites and locations, but outsource the rest of it. And of course, the business has separate mobile sites and social sites, particularly Facebook, and they do postings of video to sites like YouTube. And these are often managed again by the business itself and are a key source of data or signals to search engines. And again, as we said, purchased advertising in the form of premium listings are also there and can be a cause of conflict with database listings if tracking links or tracking phone numbers are used. And they can appear there as mismatched duplicates. Next are the publishers themselves, third-party publishers. And these include print yellow pages, which are still significant as the listings that they have, as well as the display ads, still represent a secondary source of profile information for the entities that provide the underlying databases for search sites. In other words, the publishers are actually going to be, the data providers are actually extracting data from the external print sites, including the ads, to grab information such as categories or phone numbers. So a business needs to monitor these as well for consistency and be vigilant if they are using tracking phone numbers there. They'll often surface on online search, whether you like it or not. So the other area are vertical databases, which are mostly for professionals or special interests. They might be a database of medical practitioners or architects, but again, the data vendors are grabbing data from these vertical sites. They may be obscure to you or obscure to others in the sector, and are often expensive to manage submissions on these highly specialized databases. But if you're an agency or a reseller, it needs to be an important topic with a customer as to whether or not you're going to be listing with them there. And as we noted, other online directories themselves are key sources of data listings. So especially as we saw with the earlier screenshot where a yellowpage.com listing was showing up near the top of the organic results. Now that may be reducing over time, but they are still often the majority of these organic listings. We call these citations, and they are a ranking factor for entities like Google, so it's important that these be accurate too on these third-party sites. So as you can see, it starts to become an incestuous cycle, and we'll see more of that visualized later. Now, some of these online directories also provide feeds to other directories, especially of premium listings and even of the core database itself. Some of these companies include Citygrid and Local.com. And though that data may itself be blended into other search results or data sources that a publisher is accepting. So doing a forensic repair job on bad data must include a look at the advertising feeds themselves. So next to the primary data vendors, most publishers start with a database directly or indirectly with one of these sources. So management of the listings here remains an important factor for syndication and correction of data. Even sites like Google that many people will manage directly take quality or cross-referencing signals from these data sets to evaluate the validity and prominence of these listings. And this is a growing list as well. It used to be mostly infogroup, Axiom, and localese, but now factual is an important player. And when one cannot ignore the phone services and phone databases that also circulate the data, such as Verizon, Infutor, and others. These services regularly trade information between each other to ensure accuracy. And in the USA, there are hundreds of thousands of significant business record changes nationally every month. So this is not a small undertaking on the part of the data vendors. The next set are the public records. And very importantly, this starts with postal records. Publishers and, again, the data vendors and most of the resellers in the space that are managing listings for customers are routinely matching the address provided by the business itself against the post office or similar postal databases. And often they'll automatically swap it out for the postal record. Now that becomes a key source of conflict with variations coming in on spelling, on abbreviations, on the house numbering or the office numbering, where people use a route number instead of a street name. And often there are zip code conflicts, and many locations have multiple zip codes. So if a business address does not match what the post office says the business address is, one has to be very much on the lookout for duplicates. And obviously, it's a wise thing to consider conforming the way you publicly state your business address to the way the post office will see it. Other sources include, and particularly used by data vendors for data extraction and feeding onto search engines, include government records, utility records or bills. And again, this can be an issue for conflicts when you may get a corporate name like Yum Brands Inc. versus the street name like KFC that their publishers and users are actually looking for. So Incs and LLCs often bleed into the data sets, which can be a problem. And sometimes the differences can be very subtle in the name. And of significance here is that the web compilations or scraping and RSS feeds are also regularly used by data aggregators as sources or corroboration of data. So again, if the information on your website doesn't match what you're putting out through your listing submission process, you could end up having a significant problem. And of course, many companies use their agencies to manage data syndication. These might be large national agencies down to local web shops. They can also be SMB reseller services like Reach Local or Yodel, or directly with specialized listings management entities like UBL or Yext or others listed here. And one caution on this area is to be certain that the business itself maintains control of the data in case you want to switch from one agency to another. And so you want to always make sure that you have your own copies, and you want to make sure that you are the owner of the logins and passwords for that. Consumers also are publishing views of business information. A prime example of this is Foursquare, where users actually can create a location if they don't see that it exists already in Foursquare's data set. And another important one is Google MapMaker, where expert users are actually encouraged to update and correct business profile information. And so even a claimed Google listing might be updated by a Google MapMaker user without the business knowing about it. So the next step is to actually look at the data flow itself. And you can see here that it starts, of course, with the business's own internal records, and looking clockwise, you can see it goes to the situation where they will submit their own listings, either through a bulk feed or managing a listing on the site itself. Then, of course, moving downwards, you see the publishing to their own website and social pages. But again, as you go clockwise, many actually also use agencies, as we noted, or update individual bulk listings with data aggregators. Some of the larger corporations have direct relationships with data aggregators, and individual businesses can typically manage 1 to 5 listings themselves on a data aggregator's site. So these really are quite straightforward and options in the process when you get to this level. But then at the next level, you start to see how these entities then feed the data to the publication site or search site. And at the same time here, you start to see at the bottom of the page where the publishers are now grabbing data from third-party publishers or review sites. And also on the right, you see the information coming in from the consumers. So there's now alternate methods for submission. But it starts getting far more complex and somewhat circular when you start seeing how the data aggregators pull data from many of the same additional sources that we discussed. So a publisher may be getting data direct from a business, but will it match the data it's getting from the data aggregator that also pulled information from public sources? So if a bad listing gets into the ecosystem, it may not matter how many times you correct it in one location or with one data aggregator if it repeatedly is delivered via another. And we see this regularly at UBL, which is why we have to, on behalf of companies, to do forensic trackdowns of bad sources, often in close cooperation with the third-party publishers and the data aggregators. It is an ongoing conversation and not a one-and-done activity. Now the flow gets even further complicated when you see on the top left here that the phone records now start dropping into print pages and back to the business's own records. And at the bottom, the cross-referencing that goes on between the advertising, the review sites, and the consumer input. So it becomes like a merry-go-round with good and bad data jumping on and off, feeding each other at different points in this cycle. And it's either a virtuous cycle or a bad cycle. So this fragmentation of data is actually growing and not shrinking. With the addition of devices and map entrants like Apple and the growing business profile capabilities of Facebook and Twitter, some say it began with competing phone databases in the 1980s, then competing yellow page directories, then the search engines competing with those yellow page directories, then competing navigation systems and then mapping services competing with them, and now more apps and so forth. And the thing to note is that this is a global trend towards less synchronization, not more. The positive thing for resellers of services of listing management is that this represents a growing opportunity for resellers to actually present a solution in this environment. This is not going to reverse anytime soon. And on a positive note, though, if a listing is actively claimed by a business, verified and claimed, which is possible on some sites, it is effectively locked in the most part from most of these outside influences. And of course, what the business owners see is a spaghetti mismatch and a very frustrating experience. Now, many people are familiar with the ecosystem map that's drawn excellently by David Mims' Get Listed, which is now part of Moz. And it helped focus the attention on this circular data issue, but mostly with a focus on data providers and their publisher relationships. It is worth a caution, though, that some people have viewed this chart as a definitive schematic, not the helpful illustration that it is. The problem is that some of these data relationships are historic, and many were perhaps part of an original database that was provided at one point in the online publication cycle, or only certain attributes of data are extracted by these relationships. And so it cannot be relied upon as a guarantee of a full profile delivery. I mean, we know of cases where some of the publishers listed here get a database drop every year, but it sits in a drawer. So it's one of the reasons why at UBL we've migrated towards a strong focus on direct claiming of listings or data feeds direct with publishers, and use many of these relationships merely as a guide or a backup to make sure that you're covered. But one shouldn't underestimate the value of the data aggregators in the process, and this we view infogroup as the most important data aggregator, it's the most heavily relied upon. And you can see here that from their process, you can look at the many sources on the left-hand side that they go through for gathering data. And you can see it's a multi-layered hygiene process, including phone verification. But of course, it also indicates the length of time it takes to get data into and out of the system, which requires a level of patience and understanding that is often difficult to communicate to businesses in the internet age. But the validation of the data with these companies is a vital aspect of accurate syndication. So I wanted to talk about critical data fields and options. The data, publishers and aggregators and listing services typically offer dozens of data field options, everything from name, address, phone number, down to photo links, etc. And it's important that one pays attention to all of these. The vital ones, of course, are name, address, and phone number, website, and categories after the name of the and location of the business. Correct categories are the most important aspect on the data fields that are filled out. Increasingly, photos and video, which are submitted as binary links typically, are also important signals. Google, for example, takes 10 photos, and with its new carousel display, those photos become an important ranking factor for the business. And it's also a great way to engage with the customer. Interestingly, one of the most often neglected data fields that we find and publishers find are hours of operation. And yet, Infogroup yesterday did a survey, released a survey where it showed that the #1 reasons mobile callers are calling a business is for the hours of operation. It is a very much overlooked aspect of a data submission. And obviously, important to have quality descriptions, not just cut and paste information from a website's about page, geolocated keywords, and payment methods, all of which are important signals. And these all represent a discoverability opportunity when somebody searches. You know, I'm looking for someone that takes Visa card. It does happen. So I wanted to summarize the 10 types of business listing issues that we see in broad strokes. And the reason why 40% of these business listings are typically wrong. The first is clearly that the listings are missing, or they're duplicates, or out of service, or relocated locations. The second is that we often see conflicts between the corporate or versus the branch or franchise listings. And another, and we'll talk about in a minute, are professional groups. So you get a corporate or a group of lawyers or doctors operating under a certain brand name, and there's conflicts that arise there. And similarly, you see branding inconsistencies, where you get corporate versus street names, name changes, particularly long business name lengths. You get that with attorneys who want to have 10 attorneys listed in their brand name. It gets very difficult to manage online. Unclaimed listings. These locations are subject to hijacking, and we often see companies who lose passwords for claimed sites or don't know how to transfer the claimed ownership. Google is improving their methods for doing this and handling it, but it is still a highly complicated and common error. Mismatched phone numbers are regular. A lot of people will advocate the use of call tracking numbers in advertising. These bleed into the listings. They create duplicates. Google and the other publishers don't like to see call tracking numbers. They want the real numbers of the business. Those are definitely areas to focus on. Address variations, again, as we mentioned, route numbers versus the street name, in-store locations or suite numbers, and what we call zip code social climbing, which is where people want to list their business in a neighborhood address like Beverly Hills, where it might appear better. What it does is it creates a problem for the listing, and should not be done. And PO box numbers or poor service area selections are difficult for home-based or businesses that don't have physical office locations. Deficient or inaccurate categorization is one of the worst offenses here. Typically, you can do up to 5 business categories or more. They are magnificent signals for search engines for the way users search. They're looking for not just attorney, they're looking for personal injury attorney, divorce attorney, real estate attorney. Those are very key factors for the users. Website URLs, often people will use subdomains of third-party directories or tracking links. Again, these can be confusing to publishers. Photo formats and bad image links. Obviously, if you're going to submit binary photo images, they need to make sure that those links are maintained. Google and Facebook in particular today offer customized banner images for your places pages and your business Facebook business page. Those are great opportunities to have a better display. Obviously, poor or incomplete descriptions of enhanced data are another key aspect of listing issues. So the actions are really quite easily broken down to 3 areas: analyze, syndicate, and optimize. So to analyze, the first thing we do is to look at the audit the presence. Like, use a tool where you can analyze where the listings are and look for the variations on vital data. A citation baseline. Look at what Google sees of your business. What links, what directories does Google see a listing for you on? Those are the ones that are likely you should focus on in terms of repairs. Obviously, monitoring reviews and ratings against the listings are very important. And of course, monitoring your rankings and the page actions are key as well. In terms of syndication, I mean, the most important thing today is to claim key national sites like Google and Bing and Yahoo and your Facebook page. And quality is much more important than quantity when it comes to syndication. The data aggregators still are very important, but it's important to see what the data is that they've got about your business and validate it. That's easier said than done when you've got 10,000 locations, but it's a process that agencies or business listing management companies are able to assist with. Obviously, use business listing management services like UBL who handle all this process for you and take all the legwork out of it for you. And look at industry vertical sites. These are important, and probably the businesses themselves are the most expert at telling you what matters to them. In terms of optimization, obviously ensure that you've got comprehensive content, consistent data, add store locators to your website, local landing pages, ensure that there's geodata added for search engine optimization. In other words, that the information is clear that which location you're talking about, the town. Obviously, mobile display is vital today. And the last thing is actively update and socialize the pages. In other words, make sure that the content is refreshed, add new photos, add new videos, create videos, and syndicate those. The analytics and measurement, I'm just going to run through these quickly for you. This is a sample of an audit report where one can see in a PDF graphical display where the listings are, where they're not. UBL and a number of other services offer this. And on the left, you'll see a spreadsheet format, which is, if you're an expert SEO, the spreadsheet will provide much more detail for you on the what is shown in a standard listing audit report. Every variation in name, address, phone number, or URL. Citation reports. This is a view of the listings that Google will see when it's doing a search on your business name. And so over time, these typically will increase as business listings get further syndicated. Engagement. Profile page activity reports. Google, Bing, and many others provide data now of how many impressions there were, how many clicks, how many calls, how many clicks to map, what query terms were used on the place pages themselves. Prominence, obviously, there are tools to show what the Google ranking is, of Bing, Yahoo, where your listing ranks on the maps. And this is not a website ranking it is based on the MAPS ranking for the businesses. Obviously, reputation management, which is a whole other topic of discussion, but clearly monitoring reviews, ratings, and social mentions for a business is very important in terms of correcting information that's bad out there. The local segmentation, there are tools inside Google Analytics and other analytics tools that enable users to monitor the sources that are feeding links, site traffic to you. And so what we do at UBL, for example, is provide a plug-in segmentation that the users can add to their own analytics, and it says here's the traffic that came from Google, Bing, Maps, Yahoo, local.com, etc. And of course, you can also segment that by geography. So again, the core local listing syndication actions is to claim individually or bulk, lock your ownership, and prepare your branches for verification calls that they're going to get. The preparation of the regional locations is a vital aspect there. Aggregators submit and validate the data that's held. Look at the vertical directories. Use listing management services. But ensure that you keep your listings and choose a partner that fits volume requirements and type. So for example, if you're a large enterprise or a franchise versus a high or low volume individual SMB, it makes a difference as to who you might choose. Do you need someone that does handcrafted submissions versus broad-based volume bulk feeds? Who's best for what? A lot of people ask, how do you assess this? There was an independent comparison that the LSA included in a presentation recently that you might want to refer back to. I'm sure it's still online. One of the areas that we often see questions about are professional groups like legal groups and dental practices. Many people are unaware that you can have an individual listing for every one of these professionals in certain verticals. And it's a much missed opportunity for individual real estate agents or doctors or attorneys to have their own listings, because many users know the name of their attorney or their doctor, but they don't know that it's a certain corporate entity. National brands have a significant opportunity here in many different ways. One of the ways that we have worked with national brands who don't have physical store locations, for example, is they use their co-op money to fund the resellers of their product to claim their listings, but make sure that they include the name of their product in the brands and products and services carried. It's a very simple process and very effective for a national brand that doesn't own its own locations. Another good example is the installations or store within a store, maybe a red box. Here is a Blue Rhino example. They don't own the physical location, but they have a sub-installation within a garage or other location. And that's a very significant opportunity for a national brand to increase exposure. And the example with Blue Rhino is quoted that they increased their visibility by 43% with the use of that. I'm nearing the end now, and I wanted to come close to it with some notes on website optimization, which is an important factor. Here is Mary Bowling's concepts of how to create a good landing page, but there are technical things to look at, and I've listed them on the left here. Clearly, you can use micro formats, make sure the local address and phone is on each page. Important to use title tags, meta tags, geositemap and KML for Google submissions, and encourage reviews, provide links to where listings and users can post. This presentation will be available afterwards, offline. If you don't have this list, it's important that you attend to it. So one of the things I would like to finish with is why presence management offers such a great solution opportunity for resellers. I mean, it provides a clear value because it's easily understood by customers, particularly when they go to Google and Facebook. They use it every day, they understand it. And again, as you saw from the spaghetti maps, customers rightly perceive this as a confusing and time-confusing headache that they need help with. And a rule of thumb here is that the cost of repairing this is less than 1% of anybody's marketing budget, whether you're a large business or small. So, and I would also say it's less than the cost of one advertising unit. And these listings generate a disproportionately large percentage of user actions given this investment. And they're increasingly dominating display results, particularly on mobile. And the ROI can be calculated by using baseline studies of citations and web analytics and of the site action reports, like on Google Places, the impressions, and you compare the number of those visits and what it typically costs you to buy visits via advertising. And it becomes a very simple ROI equation. And of course, customers can manage a listing profile easier than they can build their own website. And of course, customers also know that they need to monitor reviews against these listings, which has a clear positive or negative impact on their business. And finally, these services are easily bundled into other services on a monthly, one-time or annual pricing basis. Whether you're doing advertising or website construction or hosting, one can easily do that. I thought this chart was interesting, which is from Oracle, that's noting how small businesses are so on top of social and the social presence that they've taken a lead ahead of large enterprises in terms of managing their presence. There are many ranking factors, and this again is from David Mims' ranking factors. And you can see as you look here that the place page signals that you claim and the citation signals are very important for ranking factors at Google. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Why does all this conversion and formatting take place with the data? Why isn't there some sort of standard?
A lot of it's to do with history, the genesis of how search engines came to be and directories came to be, and a lot of them look at their formats as proprietary methodologies. But I will say that the Local Search Association, in connection with a number of its members, are happily looking at a standardized profile format that would standardize address formats and categorization formats. So there is hope yet on standardization.
How do businesses get more reviews without crossing the lines of solicitation?
Yes, well, what you don't want to do is to manufacture reviews or put words in customers' mouths. The best way is to provide a user, either through an email or SMS text or a web page, links to your profile on those sites where you feel you're going to get most impact. And so it could simply be sending a thank you email to a customer and say, if you liked our service or would be prepared to rate our service, here is our link on Yelp, or here is our link on OpenTable. Please go and rate us there. Good or bad, it's going to provide some important signals and not cross the line.
What happens if one company is managing social activity and another is managing the listing? Should they be managed under the same roof?
They don't have to be. We often see at UBL people who are looking at different specialist agencies for social and search. So the answer is no. But the key thing is to make sure that the data that the two groups are putting out are synchronous. In other words, make sure that they've got the exact same way they describe the business's address and name and phone number to make sure it's precise. One of the dangers you'll see is where people are gaming the name of the business by calling it Bob's Plumbing of Stanhope, California, in the name itself. That is not necessary in the local listings, and it can actually lead to confusion if the name of the company is Bob's Plumbing. So as long as there's coordination, most of these issues will not be a problem between a search and social entity.
You had mentioned that tracking numbers have become an issue when used in listings. On a scale of 1 to 10, how critical is it to have the regular phone number listed?
I'd say that for 90% of businesses, it's a 10 out of 10. It's just a fatal error to create duplicates for yourself. It ruins your ranking. The main value of tracking numbers is for an agency to be able to prove its value to the business for the investment that they've made. It really doesn't help the business itself. There may be some exceptions, but not many. And it's important to understand the difference. Call monitoring is not call tracking. Call monitoring is where you're looking at the phone call information. That's different. It's where you're submitting a different phone number to one publication, to a different search engine, to a different ad unit, etc. Call tracking is great for advertising. It's perilous to business listings and ranking of business listings.
What information can a publisher provide to UBL or similar to ensure their current advertisers have accurate and up-to-date information across all sites?
Well, I think typically entities like ours, the business provides us with a simple profile, and we take care of the rest. So we will ensure that it gets syndicated out to all the important publications through the different means that we just described. I mean, in terms of the process from the business perspective, it's start with a profile and hand it off to the right to an entity that's able to manage the process. It is a lot of work. If you're a small business, doing it yourself is probably 15 to 40 hours, depending on how long it takes you. The cost of doing business listing syndication with third-party vendors runs somewhere between $100 and $700, depending on how much content you're actually getting created. So I think that's a very straightforward process for businesses.
I have a friend who has claimed his Google listing. However, if you search his business type, chiropractor from the front desk in his office, it pulls up another practice that's not his. Any idea why?
Well, for a start, it could be that his visibility is confused. It could be that his listing, for whatever reason, on the content is not as clearly categorized or well described. So I would make sure that the profile that chiropractor has filled out on their claimed Google Places is very detailed, includes all the appropriate signals in the description. It should include the location in the actual description, not in the name, to make sure it's got every chance in the world of appearing prominently. I would also make sure it's syndicated to everywhere else because they're important signals. That's different to saying that somebody else has hijacked my listing. It sounds like this person's actually claimed their own listing, but somebody else is getting more prominence, which is a competing factor.
How can advertising agencies or companies prove value if call tracking numbers are such an issue?
Well, I think that's where you go back to proving value in the way that business listings work. And one uses baseline citation reporting. You show how the listings now are seen on X number of sites versus the original number of sites. You can, if you connect the analytics of the traffic of their website, you can see the amount of traffic that those listings have generated for that business. And then it's a simple equation of you got 1,000 links now, whereas before from these sites, whereas before you were only getting 400. What is that 600 traffic referrals worth to you, and what would that have had to cost you if you purchased them through advertising means? It is not a pure advertising play. Listings aren't advertising, they're companions. But you can prove ROI without actually having to resort to doctoring listings.
Regarding call tracking again, if the business owns the actual phone number, is it still a mistake to use call tracking?
Well, the implication there is that the business is The call tracking number for the business is the actual business number, and that is absolutely fine. That's more like call monitoring. The call tracking is where you're using a monitoring number separate for each place you're publishing it. So you've got a different ad, a different number running in an ad, a different number running on one site, a different number running, on a billboard or whatever. That's where it becomes complicated. What the publishers want to see is the phone number that the business would be known for by the customers out there in a consistent manner.
Does Google, Yahoo, etc. provide any how-to guides for a business to claim their listing?
It's quite straightforward in general, without getting into the tricks of the trade, so to speak. So I think if you go to look up your listing on each of those 3 sites and click through to managing that location, the step-by-step process is relatively straightforward. There are some pieces of advice. There are numerous YouTube videos by experts on managing these claimed listings, particularly on Google. I would tell you, though, that it becomes time-consuming and it changes regularly. Google has just changed the dashboard layout again, so it can be quite complicated, which is one of the reasons why a business itself needs to evaluate whether it's worth their time doing this versus spending $100 to $400 or so to have a third-party entity manage it for them.
What's the best way to have closed locations removed from listing publishers?
Well, again, most of the entities, the data aggregators, publishers, and entities like ours, the business listing management companies, we can submit delete orders. So you can go to most sites and say this business is reported as being out of business. But I do think if something is an out of business location, I would go through the same syndication process, but doing it with a delete request. Now that may sound unusual for a single business to go through that process. That's not normally where you have issues, because a single business going out of business typically doesn't impact them. Where you see it is where you've got franchises or moved locations of branches, or ATM machines, that kind of thing for large enterprises. And that is something where in the general flow of submitting adds, changes, and deletes, the data aggregators themselves or the listing management companies or the agencies can manage delete orders.
Can a publisher claim a business listing for one of their advertisers on their behalf?
Typically, that's against the guidelines and rules of the publishers. And so when I talk about UBL doing a lot of this today, it's important to note what we mean by that. And it's a very complicated process to work with a business location to approve and verify their location. So really what you have to do is either be physically present or virtually present with the business itself when they do the verification phone call. Obviously postcards and phone call and email verifications are simpler, but typically that is not considered appropriate for the rules to do. And also, partly because the publishers, in particular Google and Bing, they want to know that this is the authoritative source of data, and if someone's going to password protect that business, it needs to be that business itself. So the short answer is no, but there are obviously ways in which you can closely coordinate through scheduling and segmenting the process where you can be really helpful to that business in closing that verification loop.
Thanks, Chris, for conducting today's webinar. We really appreciate all the great info. I'd also like to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us at LSA and we can connect you with today's presenter. Also, we have some exciting webinars coming up from Local Market Launch, XAD, and Bing. For more information on these, visit localsearchassociation.org/webinars. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.